like cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY, Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. Hit the thumbs up notification. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification if you want to be notified every time I drop some of this straight game. The question today comes from a brother from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and the question is, how come Suge Knight was able to rob everybody for their publishing, but he wasn't able to take Tupac's publishing? Great question. And the answer to that question is Tupac was smart, and Tupac was smarter than Suge Knight. But Tupac never wanted to hurt Suge Knight's feelings. You got to understand, Tupac had been in the business way before Suge Knight even thought about getting into the business from that perspective. And what he learned was how to handle his business. First and foremost, when you deal with the publishing aspect, basically everybody or every artist that was signed to Death Row never received any royalties. They never received any royalties. You've heard people, artists who spoke out basically say that. You've heard recently Jewel on the Art of Dialogue say that. You've heard Danny Boy say that. You've heard numerous artists that were signed under Death Row basically say that they were never paid their publishing. And this is something that I tried to bring to the forefront to let people understand basically what Suge Knight had did. So upon signing the Death Row, people were so happy to get a record deal, and maybe they got a little advance. From what I understand, a lot of people were getting little monthly stipends and things of that nature, which were counterproductive to the way that a standard record deal would normally work. Normally, you would get royalties quarterly, whether it was your mechanical royalties, or then you would get your performance royalties, which come monthly from ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, one of the major performance agencies, right, who pay you royalties for that. And so basically, when Suge Knight was signing artists, he was basically having them sign their publishing away. So on one end, it was him, basically, playing this game where he played on people's desperation to get a record deal. And then on the other end, it was the artist's fault basically for signing the deal and not really having an attorney look it over. And even if they did have an attorney look it over, sometimes they would sign anyway because, they just wanted to be on. And so, but the situation involving Tupac was different. Suge couldn't, take Tupac's publishing or basically get him to sign something or his publishing over, because Tupac already came with his business intact. Not only did he come with his business intact, but Tupac, like I said, had been in the game a little bit longer than most people, and his situation was already solid. As most people, like I've told him, Tupac was basically operating under his own record label at that particular time when he was freed from prison from Dannemora. And so when it came to the deal involving Tupac's publishing, he already had a deal with Warner Brothers. He had a deal with Warner Brothers already. And so by him having a deal with Warner Brothers, Suge Knight wasn't able to come and try that same draconian tactic that he did with all the other artists. And so that's how Tupac, Suge Knight wasn't able to, should I say, unwrangle Tupac's publishing from him. And most people, and like I said, you can look on back of All Eyes on Me, as well as Me Against the World, and you would see on back of there, Tupac's publishing was called Joshua's Dream Publishing, which was basically named after a kid who was dying of cancer, and one of his last wishes was to meet Tupac Shakur, and Tupac went and actually met him, and as a token of Tupac's appreciation, he changed his publishing company to Joshua's Dream. And as you look on back of those albums, you'll see, Joshua's Dream, / Warner Tambourine Publishing, which Tupac already had a deal. And like I told y'all before, that's how Suge Knight was able to go and get a $4 million deal, a publishing deal from Warner Brothers, basically using the other artists who publishing, they may have signed away, they never really got their publishing. He used their publishing as leverage to basically fill his own pockets, if you will. And as you see, a lot of the artists today, talk about they had to take on different jobs, after they left Death Row, they had to go get a regular job. The only person that I know that really, truly, honestly fought that fight and won was Daz. And Daz basically sued Suge Knight, and he won all of his publishing and everything back. And I believe that they basically what they did was they made the contract that he had signed with Suge Knight basically null and void. They voided the whole contract out. So everything that Daz had basically done under Death Row that, Suge, basically was, taken from people, if you will, or basically getting people to sign off on, or they signed off on their own free will without the proper representation of an attorney, Daz had won that back. And like I say, I commend Daz for winning that fight, but that was the reason why, Suge Knight wasn't able to do it to Tupac. Tupac wasn't having it. And like I said, more importantly, Tupac was smarter than Suge Knight when it came to the record business aspect of it. I said before, and I'll say it again, the only way that Tupac went wrong with Suge was, I think Tupac should have questioned. This is the question Tupac should have questioned Suge. If I'm gonna supposedly, right, which we come to find out is not true, sign the Death Row, then you can't be my manager, because that would be a conflict of interest, and which it would. But I think Tupac was like, you know what? I'm not even gonna sweat it. I'm just gonna go ahead and do this little thing for these little couple of years. Do these 3 albums that he had owed Interscope. Like I said, once again, Tupac didn't owe or sign 3 album deal with Death Row. He owed those albums to Interscope, and he said basically, I'm gonna go ahead and handle that. And then, after I do this real fast, because you see the breakneck pace that Tupac worked at. He did All Eyes on Me in a matter of like a week, if you will. And so when you deal with that, that was his mindset. That was Tupac's mindset. His mindset was, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm not going to really trip. So he knew everything that he was doing, and basically as far as like, the conflict of interest and everything like that. But in order to get out of prison, he was willing to make that sacrifice. And sometimes sacrifices need to be made in order to advance and move ahead. But the key was Tupac didn't have to give up any of his publishing. And so once he would start to sell records, he would then be able to be paid and make money that Suge basically wouldn't been able to touch, even as his manager, because publishing revenue is not a part of, any kind of standard management contract. I'm not giving you a piece of my publishing money. You know what I mean? You'll get a piece of, like the show money and things of that nature, but my publishing money is off limits, and that's usually how that worked. But Tupac didn't even have to do that. So if you understand that, Tupac's royalties were basically insulated and protected from Suge, and so that was the reason why he couldn't, try to take Tupac's publishing, because I believe if he coulda, he woulda, tried to some way finagle, away from Tupac his lucrative publishing, which was worth millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars once he passed, and while he was alive, basically. So. So that's the reason from the brother from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. That was the reason why Suge Knight wasn't able to take Tupac's publishing. But he damn sure took everybody else's. Everybody else that came along in Death Row didn't get paid. A lot of those artists, right now, working regular jobs. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with having a regular job. But I just think it's so unfortunate that, he didn't give him at least 50% of the publishing, and so when you tell somebody like, we family, I love you like family, That's the furthest thing from the truth. Because if you love somebody like family, you want to see them to eat and really truly take care of their family, if you will. So like I said, yeah, Tupac was a smart guy as far as his publishing and his business was concerned. And that was the reason why. Like I said, Tupac was already locked in and had his situation intact prior to going to masquerade as an artist under death row. Your boy DELRAY, straight gang.